It is my honor to be here before you today to introduce our distinguished guest, Judge T. Micahel Peay. Judge Peay's impressive academic journey has been marked by his unwavering commitment to academic excellence, and it's been a truly remarkable career. From earning his BA in political science at Coppin State College in Maryland, to his MA in international relations at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. And for those students, if you weren't impressed by that second one, you should be. And his JD from Harvard Law School. And if you weren't impressed by that one, I mean, come on. It's a pretty high bar for impressing people. His academic achievements, therefore, speak volumes about his excellence, his dedication, and his passion. Judge Peay's career in international law has been nothing short of extraordinary. He has tirelessly fought against apartheid in South Africa as the national director of the South Africa Project for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law. His expertise and contributions led him to prestigious positions such as the Department of State's Office of the Legal Advisor, where he has played key roles in Middle East affairs, as well as serving as a special assistant to the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Throughout his career, Judge Peay has successfully negotiated numerous significant legal documents on behalf of the U.S. government. His accomplishments include over a dozen U.S. extradition and mutual legal assistance treaties, showcasing his expertise and his dedication to advancing justice. Judge Peay's contributions have extended beyond his impressive legal career. He is a former member of the Council on Foreign Relations and currently serves as the Vice President of the Washington Institute of Foreign Affairs. His wealth of knowledge and experience makes him an asset to the legal community. In recognition of his expertise, Judge Peay has been appointed as a judge on the OAS Administrative Tribunal since 2017, further solidifying his reputation as a respected authority in international law. We are truly privileged to have Judge T. Micahel Peay join with us today for this masterclass. His insights and experiences will undoubtedly inspire and enlighten us all. Please join me in warmly welcoming Judge T. Micahel Peay to Lehman College. Judge Peay.
Excuse me. Good morning. Thank you very, very much, President Delgado, for that exceptionally kind introduction. And good morning, distinguished university administrators, faculty, students, and other guests. Dr. Delgado, I take this opportunity to enthusiastically congratulate you for being the president of and for being such a dynamic chief executive of this vital and highly respected New York institution of higher learning. I also wish to extend to you and to your excellent staff my heartfelt thanks for this invitation and for your collective tireless efforts to arrange this special event on the Lehman College campus. It is a distinct honor and privilege for me to be here with you this morning, and I want to thank you all for being present, those who are here now and those who may drift in. But I particularly want to thank the students who are present for showing up, because, as they say, you guys know how to get very creative when it comes to finding excuses to be somewhere else you'd rather be than showing up to hear a guy like me today. But you showed up anyway, and I commend you for that, because showing up and being on the scene is one of the understated secrets for a successful life. I found that to be the case. You've got to be on the scene in order to reap the unexpected rewards that can happen for those who show up. So my hope, my prayer, is that something you learn here today will make you think later today that you gambled wisely and profitably by showing up to listen to these remarks. Now, as you have seen, the title of my remarks is "The Difference Between Humble Beginnings and Spectacular Endings is You." Let's unpack that headline. I'd like for you to see it as a kind of invitation to you, as a kind of case study that invites you to reflect on certain aspects of my life that can possibly offer helpful insights and inspiration for your lives. So I invite you to lean in with an open and curious ear to hear a few anecdotes about my life story that confirm the key message of this speech. Let's begin with family. Okay, Judge Peay, now, how were you raised? And what were the prevailing societal and world realities taking place during your upbringing? Well, I was born in September 1946. That was 1 year after the end of World War II. No, that was not during the Jurassic period. In 1946, in October of that year, 2 weeks after my birth, this is the international context in which I was born. 2 weeks after my birth, German Nazi leaders were sentenced to death at the Nuremberg criminal trials, and 2 weeks later they were hung. Slightly more than 1 month after my birth, the United Nations General Assembly convened for the first time at an auditorium not far from here in Flushing, Queens, before later moving to their current permanent location on the east side. At about 4 months old, Pan American Airlines became the first commercial airline to schedule flights around the world. 1 year and 2 months into my birth, the United Nations General Assembly approved a plan for the partition of a territory called Palestine. Sound familiar? And literally the day after that approval, civil war broke out, and that eventually led the following year in 1948 to the creation of the State of Israel. Now, that was the international context. The domestic context. Domestically, Jim Crow was still alive and well in many parts of the United States, particularly in the South. Racial segregation, voter suppression, assault and battery and lynchings of African Americans was very prevalent. Even the beatings of and murders of black soldiers in their military uniforms, those who had just returned from fighting for this country and for freedom abroad in World War II. My father was one of those soldiers, but he was not, he lived. Those were some of the painful and shameful realities domestically in this country that shaped the world in which I grew up. I am one of 10 kids, 5 boys, 5 girls, all from the same parents, and I was the third born and the first boy. As you can imagine, in a home with so many children, even though we were well fed, clothed, and housed, money was frequently very, very scarce. My father, who fortunately was a much in-demand master cement mason, was the sole breadwinner and was regularly employed. My mom was able to stay at home, to raise the kids, instill in us the importance of education, and teach us the difference from right and wrong. As soon as I was old enough to do so, being inspired by my father's strong work ethic, I found lawful ways in my neighborhood to make money, such as carrying the grocery bags for old ladies who had just left the market, shoveling snow from walkways, and even working on a milk truck in the dead of winter that one day left me with frostbite in my left foot. Yes, back in those days, milk was delivered home to home to home. Imagine that. Okay. I know that's beyond your imagination for some people. Anyhow, There were no fancy vacations, only an annual summer one-day trip to Hershey Park, Pennsylvania. So I think that gives you a kind of a glimpse of into my humble beginnings that launched me into life. But my humble upbringing also taught me a bunch of valuable lessons, a key one of which is that money is hard to come by. It doesn't grow on trees. And generally speaking, the distribution of money within the American society is very uneven and particularly skewed and unjust along racial lines in this country. At about the age of 11 or 12, I distinctly remember asking my maternal grandmother, "Granny, why is it that white people seem to have all the money and the better things in life?" Her quick and simple response to me was not only impactful, but empowering. She said simply, "They like to read books. They like to read books." I looked at her, somewhat befuddled, trying to grasp the full meaning of her somewhat oblique answer. So I followed up and asked further, "Do you mean that if I read a lot of books, I can become rich too?" And she nodded her head, never spoke a word, nodded her head repeatedly and with confidence to say yes. Well, that was all I needed to hear. That was like a bolt of lightning, and I know that word lightning has a special resonance on this campus. Because despite my young age, I saw no reason why even I as a young black boy, couldn't at least try to claim my share of life's riches. All I needed to do in my boyish way of thinking was to stay on that yellow brick road that leads from reading to wealth. My grandmother's answer radically changed my whole attitude, thank you, towards books and learning. To illustrate, my family had a set of about 30 thick volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica on top of the piano in our living room. So I began pulling down random volumes of the encyclopedia and reading a bunch of amazing and spellbinding stories about all sorts of things. In short order, I began to realize that learning new things was not only a necessity, but also a ton of fun. I also began to work harder in school, and I took full advantage of the privilege that I had of being able to attend a middle school and a high school in Baltimore after the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision desegregating schools. I was able to attend those high schools that were racially integrated. The student population at each school was 95% white and 5% black. I found that I made friends easily across racial lines thanks to my home upbringing. But more importantly, I discovered that I was at least as smart as most of my classmates, so my self-confidence continued to edge up even higher. Now, in the 8th grade at junior high school, or which is now called middle school, I made what turned out to be a prophetic decision, namely to study French, because it was required. You had to take a foreign language starting from the 8th grade in the Baltimore City schools. I decided to stay with French through the 12th grade every year. And throughout high school, I kept imagining and dreaming about an exotic life, speaking French somewhere in the international space, because I love geography, foreign cultures, foreign ethnic groups, and foreign languages. I just hadn't figured out how these international dreams were going to materialize and what form they were going to take. But then, as I could see the end of my senior year in high school approaching, I was confronted by two very sobering realities that would dictate the next stage of my life. I had to either get admitted into an affordable college, or as my father would often remind me, get out and find a full-time job. Trust me, that second option scared the bejesus out of me. My parents acknowledged with regret that they could not afford to send me to the colleges I wanted to attend, which was Howard University or Morgan State University. So literally at the last minute, I applied to and got admitted to Coppin State College in Baltimore as a commuting student. Luckily, the school was within 20 minutes walking distance from our house, and this meant I could continue living at home rent-free until graduation. I threw myself into my studies at Coppin with what you might call reckless abandon. And yet, at the same time, I was always aware that kids my same age were entering Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, and other Ivy League schools as I was entering Coppin State College, and that their learning experiences would be markedly different from mine. I was also equally aware that when we graduated in 4 years' time, they would be competing for the same jobs I would be competing for, and would be competing to get into the same graduate schools I would be competing to get into. So I came up with a little scheme to help level the playing field between the Ivy League schools and Coppin. And remembering what my grandmother had said, I began regularly to read the recommended reading materials for most of my college classes, in addition to the required reading for those courses. In order to do this, I had to learn to live with less sleep. But I knew that I was making an important investment in my future, and this paid off hugely. At the end of my first year at Coppin, I earned a 3.96 GPA and had begun to make a positive impression on most of my professors there. One day I approached my faculty advisor and informed him that I desperately wanted to study abroad for a semester or a full year, preferably in Paris. He happily walked me over to the campus library, and there, over the course of 2 hours, we combed through a large number of catalogs looking for study abroad programs with funding that matched my academic goals and my financial needs. One of those programs required taking a French competency test that was given nationwide on the same day in a number of U.S. cities, including Baltimore. I was fortunate, I took that test, and I was fortunate to earn the second highest score nationally, and therefore I won a half scholarship to spend my entire junior year in Paris, at the University of Paris, and at a private Franco-American school there. You can imagine my excitement and my family and community's excitement. But now all I had to do was to come up with a substantial amount of cash to match the other half of the scholarship. Well, the people of Baltimore, and especially within the black community, took care of that problem for me through church bake sales, check donations, and fundraising drives, plus news articles about my scholarship that were published by Baltimore's top 3 newspapers. We managed to raise several $100s more than the matching amount. So let me pause there to take stock of what I've said up to this point so that I can relate it back to you and particularly to the student body. I want you to see that everything that led up to my winning that scholarship was clearly a byproduct of important, let's call them building blocks or lessons for success that I had learned along the way and then put to good use. These are the same building blocks and lessons that I want to leave with the students today. What are they? I would say there are at least 5. Number 1, becoming passionate about something that you love or want to learn more about, something that could potentially become a pathway to a successful life and career for you. Number 2, then nourishing that passion. That means like watering a flower regularly to keep it alive, watering it and nourishing it with repeated dreams in which you regularly imagine yourself living out that passion. Number 3, strong academic preparation, meaning recognizing the importance of hard work and sacrifice and less sleep maybe in pursuit of your studies in order to prepare yourself to realize your dreams when opportunities happen to arise. Something that must be remembered is this: sometimes, but only rarely, opportunity will knock on your door by coincidence or sheer luck. But more often than not, opportunity favors those who are well prepared. Number 4, adopt an inner attitude of audacity. An outer attitude can sometimes create problems, but keep that inner attitude of audacity within you, an audacity that says, yes, I dare to have the audacity to reach high and to achieve my dreams, even when others may not believe in me, or when they even try to discourage me from achieving my dreams. That inner attitude of audacity, you keep it strong, will give you the resilience to push through all of the negativity. Maintain, finally, 5, maintain a never-ending determination to succeed as an unbreakable spirit within you. And once you've harnessed and understood these 5 lessons, then you are ready to experience what jazz pianist Herbie Hancock calls the wide, wide world of possibilities that can and that will occur, possibilities that you could never, ever have imagined. So with these 5 lessons in mind, allow me to share with you some interesting anecdotes of true stories from my life and my career that demonstrate how these 5 lessons have shaped and fostered what I have been fortunate to achieve to date. Passion and hard work. Okay, let's talk about that. Okay, let's start with an example that relates to my passion to learn French and my passion to study at a French university. Well, I could hardly believe it that because of the scholarship that I had won, on September 8th, 1966, okay, 66, I found myself boarding the steamship SS Aurelia of the Holland American Line, right here in New York, along with hundreds of other U.S. and foreign students who were all about to sail 9 days across the Atlantic. Some were going to disembark in Southampton, England, and the others, like me, in Le Havre, France. Yes, back in those days, it was common for students to sail back and forth between Europe and the United States on student ships instead of flying. After 9 unforgettable days on the ship filled with classes, fun, and great Italian meals, we arrived in France literally on my birthday, my 20th birthday. Can you imagine that? These are the possibilities that were unimaginable, when I was much younger. Now, my roommate from Minnesota and I lived with a French family in the wealthiest district or arrondissement in Paris. I was one of roughly 60 American students enrolled at this accredited Franco-American institution of higher learning that was not far from Notre Dame Cathedral. And we also took courses at the University of Paris. I took 2 courses there, in addition to the courses at this private school. Of these 60 students in our group, there were only 2 African Americans, my dear departed friend Benjamin Ward and I. My fellow American students decided to elect me as president of the student body. During our first vacation break in the fall, my roommate and I decided to visit all the major tourist sites in London, and we hitchhiked back and forth to Oxford University. During the Christmas holiday, the American students all went to vacation in the Austrian Alps. They organized a trip for us to go to the Austrian Alps, where I learned how to kick back these little glasses of schnapps, one right after another without falling over on my face. And I also learned how to ski. And during our Easter break in the second semester, my status as the student body president enabled me to organize a group of 30 persons for a guided tour of Soviet Russia and Poland. And I had to lead this group on that tour at the age of 20, okay? At the end of that school year in Paris, I even saved enough money to treat myself to a 2-week vacation to Italy, that's the prima, visiting Venice, Florence, and Rome before flying back to Baltimore. You can imagine my mushrooming astonishment after all this had happened at having been blessed with all these affluent lifestyle experiences that were happening to me, a poor young African-American boy from Baltimore. And I was only 20 years old. I began to see these developments as preliminary down payments or dividends that validated my passion to learn French and to see the world, and as dividends on my investment in hard work and sacrifice, which encouraged me to continue to invest in that style of living. And therein lies the critical message for you, particularly students. These anecdotes are clear proof that all things are possible if you only believe in and continue investing in yourself. Because my view is this: if it can happen to me, why can't it happen to you? Period. While in Paris, I decided that I definitely wanted to pursue a career in international law. I wanted to be an international lawyer. So after returning from Europe, from Paris, my sights were now set on graduate school and then law school. Because I had graduated from Coppin with close to a 4-point average, Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies offered me a full ride to earn my master's degree, zero cost. Of course, I leapt at this opportunity. I studied diligently at Hopkins just as I did at Coppin, and again graduated with honors from Hopkins. Indeed, my international law professor, bless his heart, Professor Stephen Schwabel, voluntarily, after class one day, offered to write, and he did write, a letter of recommendation to support my application to Harvard Law School. I was admitted there, and off to law school I went. I earned respectable grades at Harvard, and after my second year there, at the end of a summer law clerkship at one of Washington's most prestigious law firms, Hogan and Hartson, the firm offered me a full-time job after graduation. So I went into my third year knowing I had a job waiting for me at the end of the year. I worked there for 2 years practicing corporate law and other fields of law. And here I want to underline something critically important that happened, that each of you, I hope, will also integrate into your professional and personal lifestyles. And that is to develop a spirit of volunteerism, volunteering your time and talents to assist others and to assist needy causes, because that's how you roll, okay? You can make time for it, as I was fortunate to do. Here is just one example of how helping others can unexpectedly come back to help you. Okay, I once, while I was at this major law firm, I volunteered to write a legal memo for an outside Washington, D.C. based human rights organization that was combating apartheid in South Africa. I did it because it was the right thing to do, writing that legal memorandum. But that memo unexpectedly led to a job offer for me to become the director of this same project, Southern Africa project, that was fighting apartheid. It landed me my first opportunity to become a full-time practicing international lawyer, which was my ultimate career dream to start with. That came from volunteering. So I left the firm to take this new job, and I loved every minute of it. I was giving speeches all around the country, in Europe, about the horrors of apartheid and South Africa's violations of international law. I had attended international human rights conferences in Geneva, Switzerland, Senegal, West Africa, Lesotho, in Southern Africa, focusing on apartheid. I testified before the United Nations and before the U.S. Congress on South Africa's multiple violations of international human rights law. My organization sued South Africa in U.S. courts and U.S. administrative agencies to prevent South Africa, apartheid South Africa, from doing business with the United States in certain commercial spheres. I even attended a political trial in South Africa as an international observer. And I was later detained by the security police, the South African police, and I was thrown out of the country. The stories I could tell you of what happened there and what I observed and experienced would amaze you if we only had the time. But in the interest of time, I will now offer you a speeded up, abbreviated list of some of the most incredibly interesting career experiences I've been privileged to have as a result of those 5 building blocks of preparation, thank you, that I mentioned to you before. Good, make sure they don't fall off. Let's call this list my list of spectacular endings. Excuse me. And feel free to ask me to elaborate on any of these during the question and answer period. In 1977, 4 years after law school, I was actively recruited to become a career attorney in the Office of the Legal Advisor, affectionately referred to as L for legal, in the U.S. Department of State. This is the most prestigious international law office in the entire U.S. government, and most other governments think in the world, and it is. It's very hard to get into. And So with but nevertheless with mixed emotions, after having been at the Southern Africa Project for almost 2 years, I left there to join the legal advisor's office because I wasn't going to turn down that golden opportunity. My first L assignment was to be the attorney responsible for advising on legal issues relating to the Israeli-Palestinian dispute. And I was responsible for all U.S. legal issues, all relating to South Asia, including Afghanistan, Iran, India, Pakistan, among other South Asian countries. In 1978, the year after I joined L, I served as the legal advisor on a secret U.S. mission that took place, that was supposed to take place in a country next to Saudi Arabia, in order to discuss the possible normalization of diplomatic relations between the United States and that country. What happened along the way, I'll just leave as a ... You can talk to me about that later. Anyhow, as part of that trip, in connection with that trip, I was also sent to Iran by myself to negotiate with the foreign ministry lawyers there in an effort to get Iran to resume making payments that it owed to the United States on a $55 million World War II Lend-Lease loan. And they had suddenly stopped making those payments, and my job was to go to find out, why have you stopped? You owe this money, continue it, and so forth. In 1979, 2 years after I joined the legal office, I accepted an offer from the Jimmy Carter administration to become the special assistant to the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Andy Young, and to be the director of his State Department office, since he spent most of his time here in New York, with the UN. I took temporary leave from the legal office to take this political job, and since Ambassador Young was a member of President Carter's cabinet, my job was to represent him in Washington at any meetings of senior officials to which he had been invited, including meetings in the Situation Room at the White House. I also attended the daily Secretary of State senior staff meetings at 7:30 every morning. So as you can see, that job gave me very high visibility within the State Department. In 1980, at the age of 34, I was offered an ambassadorship to Malawi, an ambassadorship, but I had to respectfully decline it for personal family reasons. And then I returned to the office of the legal advisor. From 1980 to 1987, while back in L, I negotiated, as was said by Dr. Delgado, over a dozen extradition law enforcement treaties. But my 1983 experience negotiating one such treaty with Morocco is, I think you'll find, particularly interesting and relevant to this colloquy that we're having. Here's the backstory. The King of Morocco and the then U.S. Attorney General, William French Smith, had set during a state dinner that was held at the White House months before, sat next to each other at the dinner table and decided on a date that the Attorney General was going to come to Morocco in order to sign a new law enforcement cooperation agreement with Morocco. This was to be the first such agreement that the United States would have signed with an Arab or a Muslim country. By the way, Morocco was the first country in the world to recognize the United States the day after we declared our independence. And that's why the relationship between those two countries is like this. It has been. Okay. So, I was designated to be the head of the U.S. negotiating team, and we had only 11 days to negotiate and prepare letter-perfect copies of this 15-page agreement in English, Arabic, and French. However, the day before the negotiations were supposed to start, the simultaneous interpretation team that Morocco had contracted to assist our negotiations informed the Moroccans that they would be delayed by 4 or 5 days due to a schedule conflict. They got extended to some other UN conference in Asia unexpectedly at the last minute. But the clock was already starting to tick. And we're sitting there at the table ready to start negotiations. No one on our team spoke Arabic, and the Moroccan team's English was not strong enough to allow them to negotiate in English. But in my preparations, back to preparations, okay, doing your homework before you get to the place where you have to perform, I learned that French, in the Moroccan constitution, Arabic and French are the 2 official languages of the country. And everybody, all the students, everyone has to learn those languages and speak them fluently. And since I was the only U.S. delegation member who spoke fluent French, I found myself, I therefore had to lead the U.S. team's negotiations on day 1 in French with the Moroccans until the interpreters arrived. 4 or 5 days later, I almost got a migraine headache. I don't get headaches, but I almost had my first migraine. The negotiations continued to advance smoothly. The agreement was completed, and it was signed on time. My fluent French wound up saving that negotiation from certain disaster and embarrassment for the 2 countries. When the Attorney General learned of this, he wrote me a personal letter of appreciation for my extraordinary contribution to the timely completion of that negotiation. And here again, I want to go back to remember what I said about the importance of being prepared to step forward to get the job done. This Moroccan anecdote is what you could call proof of concept. In 1987, I was promoted to become an office director in L, which is like being a senior partner in the most white shoe, prestigious law firm, because they don't open that door very easily. Okay. And I became then a member of the Senior Executive Service, which is the highest level for a civil servant in the U.S. government. My first job as an office director was responsible for European and Canadian affairs. And then, in 2000, through a competitive process, I was fortunate and blessed to be selected to serve as the senior legal advisor to the U.S. mission to the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland. And there I served for 5.5 years. I met my wife there. And by the way, if I hadn't been able to chat her up in French, I wouldn't have gotten married. So my French, my French locked in. I mean, this game was perfect. Anyhow, and so, but that job in Switzerland led to another job offer that for me to come to Paris to be the senior, after I finished my 5 years in Switzerland, to come to Paris to be the senior legal advisor to the U.S. mission to UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Science, and Cultural Organization. And I served there for 3.5 years. Dr. Delgado has already mentioned the multiple legal instruments that I have helped to negotiate, including one that I'm particularly proud of, two actually that were negotiated in Kobe, Japan in 2005 that I'm particularly proud of because they both relate to things that governments, both national, city and state governments can do, and governments can do cooperating with each other to, at times of disasters, to reduce the risk of death and destruction of property. It's called disaster risk reduction. And those agreements and those guidelines that we negotiated in 2005 are being applied today and are helping to save lives and property around the world. I could go on, but I'll stop there. I think you can see how all of my building blocks of preparation were able to come together to continue blessing me with a successful career and a series of spectacular endings, you might say, that met and indeed exceeded my wildest dreams. I cannot close, however, without acknowledging that none of these accomplishments would have been possible without God's divine intervention and the support of my mother and father and so many others along the way, as will happen to you, there will always be angels there for you at the time that you need them. I'll close by saying this. Regardless of which generation we may have been born into, we all have one thing in common. Each generation has no choice other than to seek out and seize the unique opportunities that life is currently presenting to you in your day and time, and to overcome the obstacles and setbacks and unique challenges that life throws at you and us in your day and time. But I can guarantee you that you will have a far greater chance for career success if you adopt and apply the 5 preparatory building blocks and lessons that I outlined earlier in my remarks. Hopefully, you now have a fuller understanding of why the difference between humble beginnings and spectacular endings really does start and end with you. And if you do understand this, then now it's time for each of you, in your own way, to do 3 things. 1, finish constructing your own building blocks to prepare for success with your passion and your dreams in mind. Seize your unique opportunities when and as they arise, and be courageous about doing it. Don't hesitate. And then 3, maximize your God-given potential, which is in each one of us, so that you can reap your bounty of spectacular endings. Thank you so much for your kind attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Hello. So, Judge Peay has led an illustrious career, and I'm sure many of you have questions that you'd like to ask him. I mean, he went way back and gave us the trajectory that he's gone through in his career, and I'm sure he didn't give us all of the detail that went into some of these anecdotes that he shared with us. So are there any questions that the audience would like to ask?
Judge Peay, I was impressed with the notion that you mentioned towards the end of your talk something about God's intervention.
Yes.
Can you share with us a bit about your faith, tradition, and the role in which it played, not only in your humble beginnings, but in, as you call, your spectacular endings? In addition to that, since we have students that are here with us today, can you also share the role of mentoring and how it plays a significant role in the 5 lessons in which you shared with us that ensures one's success?
Thank you so much, Dr. Gilbert, for those 2 excellent questions. In the order in which you posed them, yeah, you know, my parents were Christian tradition, God-fearing, but as I got older and older, I started realizing my parents were very reasonable religious people. I say that because we went to Sunday school every Sunday. Thank you. We went to Sunday school every Sunday, and we went to 11 o'clock service, and then church was over for Sunday, and then we could go and do other things. In some other families, they would go to 11 o'clock service, and they'd go to a 3 o'clock service, and they'd go to a 7:30 service, all on Sunday, and we always thought that was a little bit too much. But we were instilled with belief in the faith of God, and that the hand of God would always be with us if we're doing the right thing, okay? And then we had my parents living out and acting out the word around us. And my maternal grandmother was an ordained AME minister, the same grandmother that I was referring to. She's a very important person in my life. And so it's very important to have, for those who are so inclined, to reach out to a higher being and to realize that you can't do all this by yourself. And when the good things happen, to give thanks and to feel grateful. Now about mentoring, critically, that's an extension of the volunteerism. There's so many young people who need help in the world. And we were always taught as we were growing up that we were very fortunate that, you know, we were on the right path, and, you know, we observed, and sometimes in certain parts of the community, kids that had gone astray. Well, it was only because certain things were absent in their lives. Anyhow, as I became a professional, throughout my professional life, I found myself mentoring, including when I was in law school. In law school, let me tell you, my colleague from Puerto Rico, who I met before, who's one of your administrators, is a lawyer also, and he will tell you law school will kick your rear end. But we still found time every Wednesday, one of my buddies and I from New Orleans, to go over to the Police Boys Club and tutor kids for an hour, or in Boston. We went from Cambridge to Boston. And as a professional lawyer, for a number of years, I mentored kids in one of the most drug-infested, poverty-ridden sections of Washington, D.C. I'll tell you something that's very interesting. I must have tutored there for 8 or 9 years. And I was never attacked, approached, or threatened. Neither I nor my car. Everyone knew that we were there every Wednesday for those kids. In fact, sometimes if somebody didn't show up, I knew where they lived. I would go to their house, knock on their door. So I said, "You're supposed to be over here. You know, it's time for the lesson." And I'll start with this. This is something that almost, you know, it touches my heart every time I tell this story. One girl, young girl, had a brilliant young African-American woman. She was so smart that she had gotten admitted to an all-white private school on a scholarship. But her father was an alcoholic and didn't live in the city. And one day, they had a father-daughter dance. And because I had been tutoring her, she felt close enough to me to tell me this. She said, "Would you please go with me as my father?" I said, "Of course I would." So I said, I said, "Let me talk to your mother and make sure it's okay." I said, I'm going to pick you up. I'm going to escort you with my arm down to the car. I bought her a corsage, you know, and she went to the bar. She had a ball, just had a wonderful ball, you know. And so, I mean, you know, giving back, you know, because I've been given so many things. I hope that answered your question. Okay. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Just a moment. Hold on.
How you doing?
How you doing?
Judge Peay. My name is Andre Hampton. It seems that you achieved success pretty young in life, especially academically. But if on your journey at all you experienced any failure or self-doubt, how did you combat that and, you know, keep that urge to continue?
Yes, good question, because even when good things are happening to you, sometimes you figure, well, you know, you start having self-doubt or others around you. I remember there were kids who were my peers, and when I would tell them that I wanted to be a lawyer, and we were, you know, somewhere between the ages of 12 and 18, not 18, 12 and I would say 16, you know, they would laugh. Then they're never going to let you become a lawyer. They're never going to let you do this or do that. And it's that inner audacity that I talked about, you know, and that sense of that unbreakable spirit of. Here's what happened to me in the middle of my career at the State Department. There was a white gentleman who was well connected in the Reagan administration who got appointed to a political position in the office of the legal advisor in the front office. This is the top echelon of people. And there's always one political deputy. Okay, he got that. He was so far out of his league. He had never studied international law. He had not gone to anything that you could call the upper echelon law school. His career up to that point had been lackluster, but he had good political connections. And when he arrived, he had all of the lawyers over whom he was responsible put together a kind of a resume book, including a photo. This had never happened before. And all the years, and it hasn't happened since, I guarantee you. And I walk into his office the first day. I'd never met him. He had scheduled meetings. So I walk into his office, and he says, "Oh, so you're the one with all that education." His first words to me. And my first reaction was, I was like, going back in time. I said, that's right. It was unlawful and punishable to teach an African American to read or to be educated. And this guy was channeling that in me. And I said to myself, you know, he doesn't even know enough about me to be having this attitude. And then one day, about a year later, he had been supervising me. At the end of one of our weekly meetings to go over what we were doing in my office, he said to me, "I hear that you're applying to become an office director. Mike, you don't have what it takes to be an office director. You don't have what it takes." And I said, "I beg to disagree." And then we ended the meeting. Okay. I'll remember one time in my first year at the legal office, remember I was working Middle East and Palestinian, Israeli affairs. One day, a young Foreign Service officer comes into our office, the Middle East Affairs office, and there's only 2 lawyers in that office, the director of that office and myself, okay, taking care of all the Middle East issues, all right. And he walks in and he says, where's David? David was the office director. I said, he's in a meeting over at the Justice Department. So I said, oh, well, I've got this urgent memo that has to go up to the secretary today. It's got to get legal clearance. I said, well, I'll be happy to clear it for you. He says, I can't trust my career in this legal memo to somebody who's an affirmative action lawyer. So I realized, look, you got to handle this smartly. I said, okay, I tell you what. David has left not long ago to that meeting. I don't know when he's going to be back. But you say this is a memo that has to go to the secretary? Look, you have 2 choices. You can give it to me, and I'd be happy to drop what I'm doing and give this immediate priority, or you can wait until David comes back. So he looked at me and he realized he couldn't afford to wait until David got back. So I can almost imagine and remember now, like in slow motion, he like handed the thing over to me, you know, and I dropped what I did it, and I went through it carefully, made several necessary legal additions and edits to it, and I had the pleasure of making several grammatical improvements and edits to it, you know. And when he came back, I called him, I said, it's ready. He came, he sat in a chair. Rather than taking it and leaving, as most people would do, he sat and he read it. I could see his eyes widening, and a smile came on his face. And he said, okay, thanks. He got up and left. He then regularly was coming to my office for legal advice without any hesitation. So, you know, in situations like that, you can't take it personally. You have to rise above that ego thing, and you know, you got to get the job done. The secretary needs this. He doesn't have time for me and this guy to play out, to have a gladiator's duel over our egos. We don't have time for that, you know. Another question? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Judge. My name is Esmerlyn. I have 2 questions. So the first one is, you know, I noticed that the world that we live in right now, the economic situation is really crazy, and I feel like, you know, what you said about finding something to be passionate about and really putting effort into that, I find it a little bit difficult sometimes, just because, you know, you got to pay the bills, and sometimes your passion doesn't pay the bills, you know. And I just wonder, like, what advice do you have for us to maneuver our passions in a world where they don't value that? They much rather value labor. And my second question is, you know, you spoke about how books have really influenced you a lot, and I can agree with that. It has done the same for me. My question is, what books do you recommend for us? You know, I'm a freshman in college, and I would really love to you know, yeah.
Very good. Very good. Your first question is very, very thought-provoking, because you're right. You know, a person can have a passion, it's very real, it's very deep, and you've had it for some time, but you keep bumping it into walls. And the only advice that I can give is to stay with your passion, because in the end, you will find either a door that opens that allows you to pursue that passion, or you will have an epiphany or some development that occurs that opens your mind to another way to apply that passion in a way that's slightly different from what you had imagined, but valid and promising. And so I say, just never give up. Have faith. Keep at it, because you will succeed. And yeah, I've had setbacks. Sometimes you have, but it's how quickly you bounce back from that matters. And now, in terms of books, oh my God, this is like asking me which one of those volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica should. I would say biographies of important people who, for you, are important. People's personal lives and their biographies are fascinating, and a lot of the, for instance, there's a lot of people of color who are now rising as prominent authors, who are writing about not just politics, but who are writing, novels and so forth. For instance, I don't know if you're interested. Okay. So what you're really asking me is, what books have you read recently? and one of them is Neil deGrasse Tyson's, the famous astrophysicist. Letters from an astrophysicist. He writes, these are responses to letters that he has written from people who have written to him, not just about astrophysics, but about things in life. And it covers the waterfront. It's phenomenal. There are some African-American women was one woman whose last name is Greer, who's Ta-Nehisi Coates is another one. Now, if anybody in here is interested in South Asia, India, and China, and the history of the narcotics wars that took place with Britain in the 19th century, there's a wonderful author whose name is Indian author whose name is Amitav Ghosh, who has written like a trilogy of novels that actually depict the fascinating history of that region of the world. But it's love stories and family stories. I mean, it's like the closest I can compare it to is, you see these wonderful Netflix episodes. Some of the best. His book reads like it's like a Netflix series of episodes in writing, and you won't want to stop reading that. And so it's a question of what you are interested in, And the New York Times bestsellers list is usually pretty good. I even find that if you go to the Amazon books, their listing of books corresponds a lot to New York Times bestsellers list. And read everything, including poetry. Edna St. Vincent Millay. That's one of my favorite ones.
It concludes our time for this master class. However, Judge Peay has a few minutes before he's off to lunch. I was wondering if we could get everybody on stage for a photo with a group photo with Judge Peay for his master class, and then you can stick around maybe for a few minutes if you have additional questions that you'd like to ask him.
Sure, because I'd be happy to answer any other questions, including
Fantastic.
Anything.
Thank you. Everyone, on stage, let's go.